I'd like to talk a little bit about remoting for Windows Server because some of these terms can be confusing and some of them sound very much alike. So let's take a look at these three technologies: remote desktop services, and AppV. Now I realize that remote desktop and remote desktop services sound very much alike, but they are actually quite different. So let's take a look at these one at a time. In the first case, remote desktop, all we're doing is having a guy sitting at one computer but running another one. So he's sitting here, but what he sees on the screen and what he clicks and types goes on as though he's actually sitting over here, even though he's not. So the screen appears, whatever screen is on the server, that screen shows over here on the client, and he's just typing and clicking, but everything that he does is going on this computer. It runs over Remote Desktop Protocol, or RDP. The second one is Remote Desktop Services. Now in this case, he's not running this computer, this entire computer. He's simply running one application, and this application is going on the server over here, but he's running it. So what's happening here is that the server is just sending screenshots over here like this to this computer, and in turn the clicks and keystrokes are being sent back over to the application over here. Now this is actually also running over RDP, or Remote Desktop Protocol. The third one is AppV. In the case of AppV, the application that's on the server here is actually sent over to the client computer, and it can run on the client computer and then die when it's done. So this guy can actually work on the client computer over here, and it looks as though this application always was on the client computer, even though it's not. Now this one does not run over RDP. This actually runs over HTTP with the server message block, and or over real-time streaming protocol, RTSP. So because of this HTTP bit over here, as you can imagine, we also have to have web services installed, the IIS web server installed, and we also have to have a SQL database role installed on the, or I should say a server, a SQL database server installed on the server. So let's take a look at a couple of those things here. I'm going to go first of all to a server, and let's see where I would set up remote desktop. I'm going to click local services here. This is a Windows Server 2016, and you'll see here that remote desktop is disabled. If I enable it and make sure that the firewall will allow messages to come from my client, then I can run this server as though I'm sitting at it from another computer. That's the remote desktop. Now as far as, let's go back here to the dashboard, as far as remote desktop services, that's actually a role. So I would have to go over here and install remote desktop services installation. Normally I use role-based installation for these roles, but this one has its own special one because it does several things. Now I can do it actually from here bit by bit. If I click over here, you notice I do have remote desktop services over here, but there would be a lot more involved in doing that when I can just click here and do the whole thing all at once. So that's how we would set up remote desktop services. Now as far as AppV, that's a little bit different story. First of all, I would need a SQL server. So I would have to download the SQL server and install it. And it would install into my server here, so that SQL server would now be a part of my server. Once I've got SQL server installed, then I'm ready to actually begin the AppV process, except that one more thing I'm going to need. I'm going to need the AppV application because it is not built into server. So I would have to go download the Microsoft Desktop Optimization Pack. And once I have that, as you can see here, that one of the components I can install from the MDOP or MDOP is the Application Virtualization, or AppV server. Now besides installing the MDOP and the AppV service from MDOP, I would also have to make sure that I come in here and do a role-based or feature-based installation, and I would have to make sure that I install the IIS server, or the web server. So I would have to install that role as well. And there are several other things that we would have to set up here for AppV, but it's rather a complex topic, and I'm not going to go into greater detail at this point. So that's it for those 3 types of remoting. There are a few other options and ways of doing things, whether or not you want access just from a local network or whether you want web access. But that, again, it has to do with several more advanced techniques and settings that you would set up as you set those things up.